Hey everybody, here I am. So I'm going to do a reaction video and I want you guys to bear with me. This is one of my first ones, but this just came out on Jubilee right now, like 40 minutes ago. And we're just gonna do it live. I haven't watched a lot of this prior to this minute right now. So
antidepressants weren't working. We'd been to every single therapist and nothing was touching it until we used he, him pronouns.
I don't even know where to start here. Sex is not assigned at birth, it's established at conception. We have to get to biology here.
Today we're bringing a new version of Middle Ground. We'll be exploring the topic, should minors be allowed to medically transition? We'll be introducing an undecided group, and they'll be listening to a discussion between liberals, conservatives, and the undecided group will pick a side after each prompt.
fair.
Transitioning has become a social media trend.
Absolutely agree. I mean, it is just skyrocketing, the amount of children that you see falling into this, and we need to stop it.
Absolutely not. People said the same thing about people coming out being lesbian, gay, or bisexual as it got more normalized, as people became more accepting of like their children and things like that. They're like, everybody wants to be gay. Now social media is around, people my age, like we see other trans people, and being aware that that's something that's being accepted by other people makes you more comfortable with yourself and like.
Okay, so he just made the point against himself. He said that back in the day, it was popular to be gay, and then everybody started coming out as gay. And now he's saying that more and more in the media and the news and in schools, you're seeing people being trans. So they're spinning it like it's not a social contagion, but just because it's more accessible and people can know about it more, that's what's causing the recent uptick in trans-identified youth, which if there was no social media, yes, there would be still 0.1% population would be trans. So I don't know, let's hear what the rest he has to say.
Like comfortable with like internalizing that it's okay to be trans in public.
I think you're falling prey to the survivorship bias, which is just sort of, you're overlooking all of the cases of people who either weren't able to come out because they weren't comfortable or safe to do so, or they either died due to suicide or other mental health reasons. But over time, if you look at left-handedness, that skyrocketed in a similar rate as people became more accepting to it.
I reject that, but
Let me ask you something. If that's the case,
Sarah.
if more people are transitioning simply because it's more acceptable, then how can your side also say that there's a trans genocide happening? Those are completely opposite. No, I know you didn't, but but liberals say that all the time. They're saying that there's a.
Did you see that guy in the middle shake his head like no? Literally every rally that I've seen at every college campus is screaming about trans genocide and trans rights or human rights, and that's exactly the narrative they're pushing, that it's either transition or self-cancel. Like, that's such a bad faith argument. I hate that. Sarah's the woman, man. She is so spot on here.
The trans genocide for some reason. So I'm just curious as to how you would square that circle.
Can we define what the trans genocide, I guess, narrative is as raised by her?
I would like her to answer that because she's the one that brought it up.
Yeah, because so we hear people saying simply because legislation is being passed across the country that is banning minors from being able to transition, that automatically means that those children would commit suicide.
And that's the other thing. They keep spinning it as, and Sarah did this too, banning children from transitioning. We're just protecting children. So if we learn to get the words correctly, and there's a spot I think later where they talk about the wording of things and how the wording changes the meaning, how people take it when you say it's a ban. Oh, there's nothing to argue about. It's just a ban and somebody else wants control of this. But if you just look at it as like I do with sports, it's considered protection of said individual or said group. So we're just protecting these people from making uneducated decisions. There's nothing wrong with that.
And that is simply an abusive statement in of itself.
Statistically, a lot of minors who aren't able to transition, who would like to, do end up.
Why don't we have this? Why don't we have this? Why don't we have the same suicide rates in the past if that was the case.
How could we have known that the people who were committing suicide were transgender if they didn't feel safe to come out?
When you look at like members of each generation that identify as LGBTQ or in that community, it's like less than 2%. And then for some reason, as soon as we get to Generation Z, it's 20%. Now, some of you may argue, okay, this is just because it's more open, it's more accepting now, everyone, it's okay to be that. But then in the same beat, you guys will say that if you don't accept them, they're more likely to commit suicide or something. But it kind of sounds like a double-edged sword.
So that didn't sound double-edged to me. It sounded pretty accurate. Like if you're not accepting of somebody, they're more likely to be self-hating. Like if you're telling somebody that they're not allowed to do something, they shouldn't do something, they're not fitting into their own body, especially experiencing dysphoria in itself, it's a mental battle in general. Like.
So to clarify your point, I think you're saying that acceptance is what's leading to. Is that right?
It's a self-acceptance, outer acceptance. It's a conversation between nature and nurture. Like,
See, here's the problem with that.
Before Arthur gets into his rant, let's talk about what he just said, how he said that self-acceptance, and they keep pushing the narrative that the kids are afraid to come out as trans because the conservatives are so against it, but we're not against it. There's nothing wrong with a social transition at, any age, in 12, 13, whatever. Let them do the hair, let them do the makeup, let them wear dresses, let the girls wear boys' clothes. That's fine, but they miss the point that we're trying to stop the medicalization of it. And the surgery, obviously, which I think just falls under the same category as medicalization. It's either surgical or medical or whatever, you're taking pills. So I hate that argument. It's bad faith.
There's 2 longitudinal studies alone that I could cite. In Sweden from 1973 to 2003, they looked at a large number of subjects who had before transition and after transition, and they had worse comorbidities, they had worse mental health issues. Sweden is a very tolerant, liberal, progressive country. A study this year, published in Denmark, 2023, 42-year longitudinal study, and what they found is that the mental health issues did not decline, they actually were augmented. It was worse for individuals who thought that by transitioning they would solve their mental health issues. It actually got worse. It doesn't help. It doesn't solve these issues. It shows it's a contagion. That is the key word.
Let's pause there then. What are your guys' thoughts on, let's say, that's a pretty popular figure that's been mentioned when it comes to a social media influencer that's risen to fame because of it?
I don't know if I'm allowed to say who they are talking about. I believe it's the initial starts with J and J. So let's see what they say.
She's just doing what she's doing. I don't think that she's doing anything wrong.
Okay, he.
Do you think that
My
has?
pronouns are she, her.
that's transphobic.
Do you think that has inspired trans kids?
I think
Okay, so immediately the guy, he's being way more combative than he needs to. If I guess this isn't called middle ground, this is called undecided. So, but either way, he's trying to plead a case. And if you're trying to convince the 3 people in the back who are undecided, negativity and anger is not the way to do it. I get the passion. I'm the same way about women and protecting women's sports, obviously, but to come at it like that, straight up misgendering the person they're talking about, who has that TV career, and that's, I think, a little bit harsh. But the lefties here saying, "Oh, it's transphobic," like that's such a cliche, and then it starts to mean nothing. We've talked about that on other shows, that they're using the word transphobic, bigot, they mean nothing. I get called transphobic all the time, and it just whatever.
she's also inspired allies to see the human being behind the pronouns and the makeup and the dress, and to see that there's someone who's going through a story, and that watching her go through that story enabled us to see the humanity behind her.
He is degrading women. You see a great disregard. I mean, look at the product that he was supposed to be promoting. It has fallen into.
Her pronouns are she,
And
her.
with all
Due respect to me,
it
like
isn't
the people who are
phobic to
following them
speak
are
the
y'all
truth.
and not the youth.
Okay.
That's not a phobia.
Let's
Telling
stop
the
here.
truth is not a phobia.
Let's stop here
It's not a
and let's go over to the undecided group.
Okay, so yeah, like I said, his anger is overwhelming the conversation.
All right, so undecided group, you guys are kind of like the comment section. Which side did you resonate with most? Liberals or conservatives? So why did you resonate most with the liberal group?
Trends pass. Trends end. So calling it a trend is saying that these people's identities are just going to go away. And I don't think that's fair. Why do you think that it's not transphobic to misgender?
Because the concept of misgendering is false. There are two sexes. There's male and female. Well, it's in the chromosomes. It goes beyond superficial or secondary characteristics. He is a male. He was born a male. He will remain a male. It doesn't matter how many chemicals he puts into his body or how many body parts are cut off. And I'll say this again. Telling the truth is not a mental illness.
Do you have a response to that?
Yeah, I think that there is a difference between sex and gender, and I know you're going to disagree with me, but transgender is its own thing, and she can be.
See right there, even the person defending the pronoun game screwed up right there. But they'll point out later here in the video that it's because this guy Arthur, I think, kept saying he over and over again. So it becomes a habit. And I can touch on this a little bit too. It doesn't quite concern this part of the video, but like, it becomes work. Like, it is so hard for people to try and not misgender people. And it turns them to the dark side of, you know what, this ain't worth it. I'm just calling you like I see you. So I've been very vocal about that. My position on that would be, call me what you like. If you persist on calling me sir or he or a male pronoun of some sort, I won't bother with it. I might tell you if it seems like you're being disingenuous about it. I might tell you, hey, my name is Jessica, that's all. And if it still persists, then I'm just gonna let it go. It's not worth my headache to make somebody else feel uncomfortable just because I got my feelings hurt. Like, and misgendering me is not gonna hurt my feelings. I'm 48 years old. It's not a big deal. Like, I mean, it sucks, but whatever.
See, no, don't try to blame that on me. You are using the wrong pronouns for this woman, and you're trying to influence something.
Do you have a specific question that you like to ask the liberal group?
I would just like to hear more from them because I feel like it was very one-sided.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Because the liberals don't have anything to say other than transphobe, that you're being transphobic. And
So you sat more on the conservative side. You want to explain why you decided to come here?
Yeah, so I think, it is just factual that there are more people transitioning or at least coming out, not even just as transgender, but just, within the LGBTQ community as a whole. And so I do see, I think for me, it does become a little bit grayer when you start to say, okay, is that because people are being like influenced to transition, or is it because it's more accepting and people are feeling more open and safe about coming out? And I think, when you're in, a friend group or when you, associate with certain people, I think you are likelier to maybe, explore your gender a little bit more, or look more into those avenues. And I think that can influence someone to transition if maybe beforehand that wouldn't have been a consideration.
Do you have a specific question that you'd like to ask either side?
Yeah, I guess I would like to ask the liberal side, and I can't necessarily trace it back to a specific time when this happened, but I do think we have seen recently a rise in people identifying with genders that aren't necessarily within a binary. Would you say that's a rise? How would you, I guess, account for that?
I think, as I said earlier, that is just accounted by survivorship bias. People previously were not comfortable enough with coming out, and that's where that difference comes from. And eventually, that skyrocketing rate will even out.
I definitely do think that is kind of a factor of it, that, people are just coming out more and are feeling more accepted. And I absolutely do believe that, that is a good that social media has done. But I do also kind of push back on the idea that it's just completely that. Like, when you look at figures who, rise to prominence, like, for example, Dylan Mulvaney, these are people with huge platforms that, are reaching to, younger people who are at stages in their lives where, they are exploring ideas of gender and gender expression and identity. And so I guess personally, I would push back a little bit against the idea that it's just people who, had it been more accepting in the past, they would have come out. I do think there is, a rise. I feel like the numbers just don't really account for it necessarily being just that group of people. I think there are people, especially youth, who are identifying more kind of on the gender spectrum or as transgender that maybe wouldn't have before.
Okay, so she brought up my favorite person in the whole wide world next to Jeffrey Marsh. That would be Dylan Mulvaney. So to say that Dylan Mulvaney is not influencing a trans generation is absurd. That is mind-numbingly dumb to say that. he is not. Now, that conservative voting undecided person said, yeah, Dylan Mulvaney is a total influence. And if it weren't for social media, Dylan Mulvaney would not have the millions of dollars and the sponsorships that he has. There I was misgendering Dylan, but that's okay. I don't believe Dylan is truly trans. He tried out a few things. He kept switching careers, and he found something that landed when he pretended he was a girl running around in a backyard, tripping over things, being misogynistic, acting like a dumb person would. And once that hit, like, he just went with it. He's like, okay, this is me now. That's what Dylan decided to do because of the social media traction that he got. He got the influence from his fans, supposedly. And he said, this works, I'm going to go with it. And now look at him, millionaire, probably, sponsorships. I mean, he's wrecked how many companies and is unapologetic for any of it. That drives me crazy. Sorry, I'm getting off on a tangent, not related to this video, but yes, there is a social contagion. And it's proven when Facebook, I believe, came out in 2003, 2004, but after 2007, when it went live and changed to the name instead of the Facebook. But anyway, so the teen self-cancellation rate went up almost, I think they said on 30% total. And even more than that, maybe even higher. You can fact check me on that, but 30 to 40% of women ages 15 through 19, their self-cancellation rate went up huge after Facebook went live. I know for my own experiences, my daughter had to be put on anxiety medication because, you know, through high school, there was social pressure, bullying, like we had to deal with a lot raising her, and it's tough. These kids have a lot to deal with. And I think adding social media influence and peer pressure, it's too much. Like, it's brain overload, especially for somebody my age who's not, you know, into the young crowds. I don't do the video game thing. So, you know, it's a lot to take in. And for someone like me, who's been in this community almost all my life, I mean, I haven't been obviously trans all my life, but, well, I take that back. I have been trans all my life. I just didn't present this way for a long time, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, if I had the internet when I was young, probably would have been better, but I could have still gotten more educated without social media. And it wouldn't have changed my outlook and my end result here. I think I'd still be the same person I am today.
You're the only undecided. Can you clarify why you still remain undecided?
Yeah, I think the reason I remained undecided was because although I appreciate the presentations of both sides and I see both their points, I was still a little bit unclear as far as what's like each opinion was on each side. So I would just be curious to ask the liberal side, is there any like evidence that you guys could present that would suggest that transitioning lowers the rate of suicide?
I would say on one hand, there is data that suggests that trans minors who are not able to medically transition when they do want to, their suicidality attempt rate is around 40%, and that drops to below 10% when they are able to transition.
See, that I don't know where she's getting that number, but I know that's not right. The suicidality rate, I mean, I could say that without getting kicked off of YouTube, but it doesn't go down. Like, I don't know. There's been so many studies, and who knows who's right and wrong as far as like and I don't mean that in right and wrong. I shouldn't say that. I should say, I don't know who to believe anymore. I literally do not know, because there are so many liberal college studies coming out that say, oh, you know, the suicide rate goes down after transition. And then I've seen other studies where it says, yeah, it actually decreases about 1% to 2%. But once full transition takes on, like, the suicide rate goes up 2% more. So, like, who do you trust in the media? Not necessarily the media, but these peer-reviewed studies, supposedly, they're so varying, they're so vast, and there just isn't enough research. And they talk about that later too. There's not enough research to justify throwing these kids on puberty blockers and, you know, cutting off body parts just to fix the mental. And it's got to be social contagion.
Moreover, if I wasn't able to transition and I didn't have any support in my life, I would probably kill myself.
See,
The conservatives, you guys were discussing social media contagion. Could you present any other like arena as far as other instances where we've seen social media have that influence on?
I'd love to add just every aspect of mainstream media. So CNN, like all mainstream news sources, when we talk about even like major corporations, we have Pride Month, for God's sake, right? We have an entire month where all corporations, all major corporations, even the government, President Joe Biden is putting a pride flag. It seems like every aspect of our like top dog, like main people in society are promoting it, right? And then if you go down to like social media, everyone's promoting it, right? Each Instagram, maybe not Twitter anymore, or X now, but TikTok, there's trends, there's things that are happening where it is being promoted. And the fact that there's influencers, I think is just proving the fact that it is indeed a trend.
Gender dysphoria is a mental illness.
It is a break with reality. I'll start at where I've said before. There are two sexes. It's determined not just by external characteristics, but by chromosomes. When somebody dies and is buried, and 400 years later, if they exhume the body and they test those bones, they're going to see that it's an XX or an XY, it's a male or a female. It's a mental issue, and you want to treat it that way. You treat it with counseling, with therapy, reflecting reality, helping the person to be comfortable with the sex that they're born with. Sex.
What do you guys think about that? It's calling it a mental illness.
Yes, I want to respond to your comment about bones and skeletons. I study bioanthropology, and actually they're moving in a direction where they're using terminology like assumed or estimated gender, because there is large overlap between the general sort of estimations. Sure. Also, no one's going to dig up someone's bones unless they've already consented to donating their skeleton somewhere. No one just goes grave.
This is that liberal college mindset that I'm talking about. It's insanity. Like, what is wrong with these people? Thinking that bones can be deceiving? Are you serious? And then she brings up kind of a valid point with like, who's going to dig up bones, but he's making a point. It's a point that's been overused by the conservative side, like all the time. It's an old arguing point. It's an old buzzword for us, but yeah, there's no way they're finding research that bones may have been multi-sex or different gendered. Like that's
robbing for that.
But that's irrelevant.
Let's hear a little bit.
The point is,
it's irrelevant to bring it up then.
No, it is relevant to point out that sex is determined at birth and it doesn't change.
But what's the point you're making with the skeleton example?
The point that it doesn't change even over long periods of time.
I'd like to hear a little bit more from
Thank you for your
both
help.
of you.
If you're walking around life constantly being told something like what you're supposed to identify as and you feel other than, like, of course, as time goes on, you're going to feel worse and worse about that specific thing.
I don't think there's a reason to transition if you don't have a mental illness. Like, there's something wrong in
That's
your
like
brain.
saying you shouldn't cut your hair because you don't
No.
want long hair.
Wow, that is so not a comparison.
So when you
Stay on topic.
I mean when it's
long hair.
Wow, that is so not a comparison.
so when you
I don't want you guys to miss what that guy said.
That's irrelevant.
Let's hear a little bit.
The point is,
it's irrelevant to bring it up then.
no, it is relevant to point out that sex is determined at birth and it doesn't change.
But what's the point you're making with the skeleton example?
The point that it doesn't change even over long periods of time.
I'd like to hear a little bit more from
Thank you for your
both
help.
of you.
If you're walking around life constantly being told something like what you're supposed to identify as and you feel other than, like, of course, as time goes on, you're going to feel worse and worse about that specific thing.
I don't think there's a reason to transition if you don't have a mental illness. Like, there's something wrong in
That's
your
like
brain.
saying you shouldn't cut your hair because you don't want long hair.
Wow, that is so not a comparison.
So when you
Stay on topic.
I mean when it's the opposite concept of gender or body dysmorphia. So when you look in the mirror and you see what's wrong with, like, you have an uncomfortability with your secondary sex characteristics, and so the treatment is to change that to match with what you want it to be. But I mean, he's right. You can't change your sex, but it's in the brain. You treat the body to help the brain. It's not any different. And honestly, I'm somebody who I don't think we should stigmatize mental illness. That's the whole point is, I have anxiety, PTSD from when I was in the military and everything else. I don't think we should be stigmatizing mental illnesses. And so I think that calling it for what it is just accepting that. And it actually helps with treatment and to what you're treating, because you're treating the brain. You have to go to a therapist. You have to go all of that. So I think it's no issue to call it. I think.
And when you treat the brain, you don't cut the body, though. I mean, if somebody has.
Okay, that guy is just so angry. I don't even want to listen to him. Sarah nailed it. Oh my God, there isn't a discussion after Sarah said all that. That should be it. Which kind of comes back to where I was on the Jubilee debate for middle ground on the trans liberal, trans conservative thing. I was kind of the silent partner in the back, and I could call out Blossom on that one for she actually posted online saying that I was a waste of space on that debate, when I have tons of feedback saying thank God I was on there. But yeah, I admit I was disappointed. You guys have seen my other videos that I didn't speak up more. That bummed me out. But in the same situation, I'm talking about like what Sarah's saying right here. Like, this is exactly it. It's perfect. And there isn't anything else to be said. Like, that is a 100% accurate description of the mental problems or illness or whatever you want to call it that we experience as trans people. So like in my Jubilee debate, Blair would say the statement, and I was like, yeah, like I can't add to that. Blair was so good doing what she did for us, representing the conservative group. Like, I didn't feel like I needed to interject, and it looked bad on me, but just letting the other people talk, like I didn't have anything like more than what Blair said, because me and Blair are like aligned down the road 100% on everything we think of and believe. So she's even a younger generation than me, being she's almost 15 years younger than me. God, I'm so old. More than that, probably 18. But yeah, so like there isn't a discussion to make after that. That's 100% fact coming from a trans individual right there.
Bulimia or anorexia, you treat the reason why they perceive themselves incorrectly. If somebody has dysmorphia, you don't say, well, just cut off a body part. But this is a complete violation of the Hippocratic Oath.
Gender dysphoria is a mental health condition, and the treatment for this condition is to do a medical transition if that person chooses to have those procedures done. It won't go away with just a simple pill. It's gender dysphoria. It has nothing to do with sex and bones and your DNA.
Do you think children are capable of making that decision?
Let me pose a question. Homosexuality actually used to be considered as a mental illness. Do you think there's any correlation here with what's going on currently with the trans movement?
It has to do with the way you present yourself. And again, I call it sex dysphoria because it's dysphoria of your sex, but it has to do with your secondary sex characteristics that you're presenting to society. You know, in a lot of regards, and even Deborah So wrote this in End of Gender, she actually advocated for this because the same hormone imbalance in the womb that causes more, femininity and homosexuality seems to be very similarly tied to gender dysphoria as well. It's just it's a further step along the way. It's a further, condition. And I agree where I use mental illness and mental health condition synonymously, essentially.
So I think what's interesting about this topic is that, we need to consider both statistics as well as personal anecdotes.
So
at any point did your opinion on this
so with the whole mental side of things, I don't like to get into it because I had not a lot of trauma, I would say, but I did my 2 years of therapy with a psychiatrist, and I sat on that couch and talked about my feelings for 2 years just to do the proper steps to get the medication that I thought I needed, or that I was known that I needed to get, the dysphoria handled. And so I would say that
in the family, the whole family. Boy, you want to see strong?
I'm sorry, you guys, bear with me on that. And we can resume this now.
I went months without a new CPAP machine. I can no longer handle the lack of sleep and endless brain fog.
Okay.
Pushing gender transitions for financial.
So, yeah, like I said, I don't know enough about the mental side of things as far as to speak on it. I'm just gonna, we're running out of time, so I'm gonna go to the next prompt, which is the medical community is pushing gender transitions for financial gain. And that is 100% if you want to talk about the fact that the medical industry wants that customer, me, whether it was my surgery here, my surgery there, my surgery there, like it's all going into the medical industry. So how would they not want that? How do they not want that customer? And I guess I'll just say this right up front. Like, so to put somebody into, they talk about this a little bit. I watched this prompt already, but so to put somebody into this life, it is a customer for life. And I know Sarah says that, a few others probably say that too. But you're creating your own financial safety net by bringing more people into the trans community. And, you know, it's just, there's a lot of money to be made off of people like myself and these 400,000 plus new identifying children that might be trans. So let's see what these guys have to say.
Gain.
So I disagree. I mean, when I was started going through my process of transitioning, I didn't feel pushed by any medical professional at all. There were, in fact, quite the opposite, a lot of hurdles and just like bureaucratic red tape sections I had to like work through.
Which is the way it should be. There are other trans people. I don't know her story, Cami. I don't know her story exactly, but there are thousands of cases of trans that are in their mid-20s. Ivy is one of them, and she spoke about, it was like, here, do this, do this, do this. You got to do this now, and you got to hurry up, and you got to get it done, or you're not going to be this way. So,
but it's not something that I think, in my experience, was pushed onto me at least.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. When I started my transition, it took over a year just for me to get to my third doctor's appointment for us to actually like talk and evaluate things. And as far as cost goes, my insurance covered everything.
But they are still getting paid. Just the government or somebody else is paying them.
I mean, in comparison to a BBL, yeah.
Well, yeah. So here, but they're still getting paid and they're still getting financial. I actually think there's 3 different types of doctors. I think that there are people that are going out there and doing it for financial gain. We saw it in Vanderbilt. We saw it in so many other instances where they are doing it. We also see that they are manipulating the system. That's why we have a lot of detransitioners right now, and that's why we're seeing that community grow, is because they're manipulating patients, they're manipulating parents. And so the third is, I don't know if it's ineptitude or if it's incompetence or laziness, but I think that there is a section, there's a group of mental health providers who simply right now, we want to cure everything with a pill. And so we see this not only in the trans community, but we see this in the SSRI community. We see this, everybody's being put onto something, and we're not really treating the root causes. It's one of the reasons why we're seeing a high comorbidity of like autism in the community. A lot of people that have autism are getting sucked into this, and they're not being treated for the autism, they're treating for gender dysphoria.
So one thing to consider, and I did research on this, is that apparently based on top or bottom surgeries, it can actually range from around $10,000 to $25,000 from male to female transitions to female to male transitions. And I think, you know, what both sides can probably agree on is that America is a for-profit healthcare industry, right? We don't have universal healthcare.
Yeah, and
anything to consider there.
So with the
socialized medicine,
with the Vanderbilt situation, she actually said because of Obamacare, they have to pay for it. And so they are forcing insurance companies to pay for it. So it became a big moneymaker, was her specific phrase that she said.
I just want to remind everyone that there are international standards of care, and there are many countries out there that have social medicine, and it's not all for profit.
Argentina and Denmark apparently are one of the 2 countries that has included, I believe, transitioning for minors in their private and public healthcare plans.
I'd like to comment, but I want to give you a chance first.
No, it's kind of hard to draw intentions completely with these kinds of things. I completely agree with you that America is a for-profit country. And so regardless of what trend or what surgery is getting popular, they're going to find a way to make money out of it.
Yeah, America is a for-profit and everything, but an EpiPen costs a whole lot more than testosterone does. So even with that, and we're once again, the push for being trans in medical societies, as far as our experience goes, doesn't really exist, because 2 people here are saying that, you know, it was quite the opposite. It took significantly longer for anything to happen, significantly longer to try to do anything, significantly longer than, you know.
That's actually really good to hear that these 2 had to go through several steps, which also I want to make a point too, that the laws that are being enacted that the trans rights activists are screaming about, that the laws are going to, you know, trying to ban people from being trans. They're not. They're not banning anything from happening. Right now, the laws that are taking place are saying we want. They're a little intrusive. I will give you that. As if you're a liberal arguing with me, I would give you that. Yes, they're a little intrusive to the point. One of the laws is that you have to have social media checked on every year. And I think for the first 2 years that you apply to start transitioning, they're going to look at your social media accounts and see what you're watching. And if that's going to be something that's possibly causing your fake sexual dysphoria or gender dysphoria, if that's just a trend, obviously from social media. The other is just a required 2-year visitation to a psychiatrist or a psychologist, just therapy. And then there's a few other minor little details that they said, okay, you have to do this, you have to be that, parental consent, da da da. And yeah, so it's just they're checking on your social media, they're making sure you're talking to a doctor, a healthcare professional. And the issue with that one, like what we just talked about, doctors are pushing it. So how do we, as conservative parents that might have a child, how do we trust the medical industry that they're not just fast tracking my kid through there? It's such a hard battle, like, to deal with mentally. I can't imagine having to deal with that. Like, I do feel for Tammy. If her kids are really trans, that's one thing, but it seems like, you know, when you have your daughter's trans and your son sees that her older sister's trans, well, I wanted to be what my sister was doing. My sister played softball. I wanted to play softball. My sister was into muscle cars with my dad. So I got into muscle cars with my dad. And it just, I don't know, like, that's sibling rivalry. That's gonna happen. So with Tammy and her house full of trans kids, it's not surprising, you know?
As far as like cosmetic surgeries or anything like that goes. So.
But
I need to point out, big pharma makes big money off of butchering little boys and girls. There is big money to be made in this. Follow the money. Ted Hidako, he's a father who's been fighting very hard because he's in a fraught divorce. His son was being put through the transitions. He saw in his medical bills $200,000 for the chemical treatments alone. We could talk about the Jeff Younger situation. Jeff is trying to fight to save his son. Now his ex-wife has taken the son here to transition him to try to become a girl. Not only are the medical costs being put upon him, but also legal costs.
So to your point, though, so what we saw out of the whistleblower out of St. Louis, who is a self-identified queer woman who's married to a trans man. She blew the whistle on what's going on there. Now, where I hear a lot of adults in this situation say that it was a long process for you, that's not what we're hearing from detransitioners and a lot of these patients, and that's not what the St. Louis whistleblower said. She said they were basically pencil whipping psychologist letters so that they could start Myers on transition. And that's one of the reasons why I think that clinic is also closed.
I know doctors, I know psychologists who will write you a letter in a matter of minutes. They're already pre-written. All they do is change the date, the name, and email it to you, and there you go. You've done your 2 years. I've just been in the community for so long that I have connections. I don't need them anymore, obviously, but I didn't use them to begin with. When I first started transitioning, I had no idea, and I didn't get educated about all these doctors that I could have used to cheat the system. I later found out about them, which is the case in my life. Like, everything I do is just bad luck for some reason, I guess. I don't know how to explain it. It's just my luck, I guess.
I mean, once again, for me, I'm always going to go on personal experience before I go on stats, because there are too many trans people specifically who don't get accounted into those statistics. So it's hard for me to be like, yes, this number and yes, this number. You know, whatever. But for me, it's like it took 1.5 years of therapy for me, my therapist, who was also trans, to go through that process and write that out for me to be comfortable, or me to
see that I'm not okay with. Like, I mean, some people would say that if your therapist is trans, they're going to have a better insight into what you're feeling. But then are they just pencil whipping you through saying, oh yeah, you're trans? Like, they just want another ally. They want another cash cow, I think that's actually a bad thing to say. I don't know if YouTube's gonna like that or not, but yeah, they want another customer, and that's called customer retention. Literally, like that's exactly what it is.
To be, whatever it may be to get what I needed. So, and on top of that, the money situation, there's so many trans people who can't afford to transition, whether they're on insurance or not. So for me,
other people are paying for it.
What other
government,
people?
Medicare, Medicaid. My goodness,
Right,
this was a
let's stop it
discussion
here.
in Wyoming.
Let's stop it here, and we'll ask the
Yes, they
undecided
are.
group. Okay, undecided.
Okay, yeah. So there is that debate too. That my brain fails me. There's a state recently that just passed a law saying that. Well, they tried it here in my state, Nevada. They tried to say, I think they did pass it, saying that a person could use Medicaid, Medicare to pay for transitioning, which that's my tax dollars paying for someone's medical transition. Now, my tax dollars didn't even pay for my medical transition. I, spent upwards of $30,000 so far in surgery, and I know it doesn't show, but whatever. I'm gonna get shit for that one, but that's okay. That's how I feel, and I'm okay with it. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah, some of my surgery and some of my medication was covered under insurance. I don't have insurance right now, so I pay out of pocket for everything. Luckily, I'm already done with everything, so it's just a maintenance upkeep of my prescriptions. Like I don't have anything else that's pressing. I saved up a lot of money over a long period of time to do my surgeries and get them done. So I don't believe that your mental disorder should be a problem of the taxpayers. That's what I'm a big advocate for. Like, I don't want to be paying for these 18-year-old kids to get their breasts cut off. Like, that's not what taxes should be used for. It should be used for law enforcement, better streets, better schools, cleaner air, whatever it takes. Like, that's what tax money is supposed to be for. Fire departments, all that stuff, medical, like saving lives, not creating more customers in the trans community.
The group, let's hear about which side that you resonate with more, liberals or conservative.
Oh, wow, they're all going liberal on this one.
You started off in the undecided, then conservative, and now the liberal.
Yeah.
You've been all across the
Yeah,
spectrum.
all over the place.
Let's hear about what kind of resonated with you more to switch sides this time.
I'm sure and confident that there are practitioners out there who are pushing people to transition, who are just signing off on prescriptions, because yes, I mean, like the points were made, that
they're just
schools
reiterate everything. Commercial real quick. Volcon E.
That was incredible. Definitely wasn't expecting
that.
Should include trans
conversion in sex ed. Absolutely not. 100% no. Let's see what they have to say, and then I'll tell you what I think about it. Let's see. Sarah, the champion's probably going to say everything that I would want to say, and I would just have to leave it at that.
Trans conversation in sex ed.
An age-appropriate time, I agree, yes.
What is that age appropriate?
I think by grades 3 or 4, they understand.
So what is that, like around 8, 9, or?
I don't know anymore. My kids are too old, but that sounds about right. I think 8 or 9 years old is a good time, because gender is a concept that is formed in the mind of a child around the ages of 2, 3, or 4 years old. By the time they're 7 or 8, they understand the permanency of gender. So I think that's a good time to introduce it.
Now, should they be talked about as just as much as, let's say, heterosexual sex, or more in terms of including different historical relevancy, anything like that?
I think it would be great to introduce the difference between gender expression, gender identity, and sexual orientation, because that is 3 completely different realms. And children can understand the difference between gender expression and gender identity at that age without ever having to talk about sex.
Yeah, I definitely disagree.
Actually, I agree with her on that. The 3 different things she brought up, the expression, and the other 2, I can't remember right off the top of my head, but yeah, let's see.
I think especially what they're proposing right now, a lot of the mainstream sort of education on sex ed is pretty vulgar. Looking at a couple books, you see a lot of parents going out to city committee meetings, and they're reading books in front of the school committee, and the school has to like stop the entire thing because they're reading such vulgar stuff.
If I had to push back on that,
Yeah.
though, kind of we've been going through like different personal experiences, and some of these cases we might just be hearing about because they're the most extremist of cases.
Sure.
Do you think that's what's going on, or do you think it's more of a common, prevalent instance that's happening around the country?
I mean, yeah. I mean, there's a differentiation between personal experiences and just what's going on in general. And so, of course, you're going to see like the more popular cases on social media and stuff. But what it really boils down to, the question isn't really so much what's the content, but is it true? And it's not true. And so why should kids be learning about it?
I mean, personally, I think that sex education should be simple biology, and then anything above that should be an opt-in system to where parents have to opt their children into that learning. I really don't think it's the responsibility of teachers to be talking to children about that. I think it really boils down to it is a parental rights issue, and parents make the ultimate decision how their children learn that.
I'm gonna get a shirt made that says Sarah knows. I guess I should get one that says Blair knows too, because they both know everything. Like it's 100% accurate. Everything they say, there's nothing to argue about. But let's see what Adrian has.
I disagree only because like where I'm from North Carolina, and there was a point where sex ed wasn't being taught. Then there was a point where it was, and when they started teaching sex ed, there were children that were coming forward about like being touched inappropriate and things like that because they didn't know that those things were inappropriate parts because they hadn't been taught otherwise. So not teaching children about their bodies, about their sex, about their gender, about their expression, you're limiting them. You're giving people, pedophiles specifically, the opportunity to prey on them because they don't know any better.
See, I take exception to that because when I was young, I knew what my private parts were. Like, don't look at mommy, like, don't look at daddy. Like, you know, from a young age, just being around your house. So my question is, did the parents of Gen Z fail? So that would be the millennials, I guess, that had kids. And are they just so letting their kids run on the internet? And that's, you know, taking away from that I hate saying the word nuclear family upbringing where, you know, you learn right from wrong at home. And I don't think school should have trans ed in it at all. Like, yes, biological sex ed. We need to know about STDs and how to have safe sex and stuff like that's important. But what age? I don't know. I'm so old that, you know, I couldn't be the proper, you know, voice to say, you know, it shouldn't be below 13 or 12 or, you know, when they start hitting puberty, I think, yeah, because that's when their sexual starts to come around. So yeah, definitely around that age.
You're leaving them in the dark. As far as like gender is concerned, like being trans, had I learned about what trans was at an early age, I think I would have had a much happier life in general.
Yeah.
By 21, I was going into transitioning and everything like that, but I felt and knew that there were.
I would have killed to be transitioning at 19. That was my goal. Like that was what I had wanted, but it didn't happen for me, and that's okay. I still enjoyed my childhood. I was angry and upset about a lot of things all the time, constantly. But I look back now at the things I was doing. I was heavily involved in sports, and that was my focus. It kept me from doing drugs. It kept me from going down the wrong path. It's because I knew I had to train, and I didn't have room for party life and social media and video games and stuff. It was go to school, do your homework, train, go to bed, eat. You know, not in that order, obviously, but you know what I'm saying? So just that was it. Eat, sleep, train, and then school and, you know, eat, sleep, train. So I think that's what kept me away from my dysphoria for the longest time is I put my focus on sports so bad that nothing else mattered. So, and you know, that's one way to push down the dysphoria, whether it's psychology or looking into other avenues, but medically transitioning is not the answer.
There was something specifically different by the age of like 7, without even knowing what trans was. And had I been taught that, transitioning later on in life would have been completely different.
Yeah, and like I said, I think it was the very first prompt we had. I think almost every transsexual I know had that early experience, right?
Sarah's going to say exactly what I would say, so I'm not going to say anything.
That's happy in their transition. So I agree in that. I really think it is the parental, it's parents' responsibility.
The schools are supposed to pick up where the parents fall off. That's the whole point of sending your children to school.
No, your parents have the right to make the decision for you.
Okay.
I just want to interject right there, and that is a very U.S. way of thinking, is that parental rights trump everything else, because there's a Convention of Children's Rights worldwide, and the U.S. is the only country who hasn't signed on to it.
This poor lady is like in tears. It's crazy. Like, I mean, she's passionate. She cares about her kids, but
so children in other countries have rights before their parents do. And I think that it should be taught in schools to protect the child.
And why is it that America, out of the 195 countries or so in the world, like, why does everybody want to come here if other countries are so great, allowing kids to have their own free will? And they should have will, but like, we've got to guide them into the right path, or we're just gonna have a bunch of degenerates running around, breaking store windows, talking back to police officers. Oh, wait, that happens every day.
Not just so that the parent gets to make all the rules.
Yeah. Okay, let's go to the undecided group. Which side do you guys resonate with more, liberals or conservatives?
And to refresh, the prompt was, schools should include I
think we have all undecided here. Let's start with you, because this is interesting, because you've always been on the liberal side until now. What spoke to you that made you undecided in this instance?
Well, I would just like to mention that I actually work in childcare and I work with children. And so as much as I think that we should have comprehensive sex education, I think that 5 years old is a bit young. I think maybe middle school age, like 10 to high school. I don't think that parents should have completely all the say, because if that parent is more on one side or the other, then they are going to push their child to do what they want them to do, and that child should be able to make that decision for themselves once they are at that age.
Maybe both sides actually do accept, the fact that trans individuals exist. However, more of the discrepancy is around the age and when it's being introduced. What do you think?
I think she mentioned around 8 or 9. I think that's a good age. I have a little brother who's 11, and when he was around that age, he was able to understand that I was queer and that my cousin was trans, and he was able to understand that we were different.
I would say around 8 or 9 is probably fine in my opinion, because that's generally the age in which children have a solid grasp on their own identity.
Yeah.
And it's usually, about 10 years after that, maybe, that they on average will disclose that. But at that age is when kids will usually figure out that they're not cis, if that's the case.
This lady, she started with this concept of permanency. I just thought that was so profound, undergirding the point that I've been making from the outset, that sex, if you want to call it gender, there's a permanency about it that needs to be respected. And when you're teaching little kids about transgenderism, you're automatically injecting confusion. That feeds to the very contagion that we were talking about at the outset. It breeds this confusion into children. That's a real problem. I agree with the point that was made here. I don't think that sex should really be pushed onto kids at all. I mean, for hundreds of years, public education didn't teach sex ed, and things went pretty well. You didn't have all this confusion. And regarding the situation about pedophilia or otherwise, you don't need to teach children about transgenderism for them to know that somebody shouldn't be touching your private parts.
Did that help clarify your points?
It did. I think, my takeaway, I guess, I would say I still kind of am unsure where I would stand specifically, like in terms of age ranges and, content. But I think, for me, I think there is kind of, for me, at the center of it is that conflict between, parents that don't want specific things to be talked about, and then parents who just don't care at all. But at least knowing that the conversation's going on and maybe signing off on that. I know we've seen that in the past with, like taking the slips home and being, showing the parent if they, like, we're going to take the kids into classes today, we're going to talk about this, sign off if you want them to or not.
However, wouldn't that kind of introduce a bit of a slippery slope? What if that happens when it comes to discussions around history, around race?
She said it about the parents don't give a shit. And I think that's a big part of it. Like, they're just too busy in their own world, and it's easier to just let your kid play on their phone than argue with them to do the whole house chores, clean up the yard, clean up your bedroom, make your bed, like Jordan Peterson says, and stuff like that. Like, that's just lazy parents, I think, have created this generation we have now. Sorry, kids, but it's true.
Do you think that could lead to parents kind of essentially shaping the worldview that may not be factually accurate?
You know, when you start talking about, I guess, you know, teaching about like sex ed and let's say gender expression, sexual orientation, I think you do walk a different line between like, you know, bringing up points of history or, you know, even like the sciences. I mean, everything, you know, what you include in a curriculum, whether it's science, factual, even mathematics, like there's some kind of, you know, political basis there, whether it's super political or super apolitical. I mean, there's always going to be interest there. And so I think what's really important is, you know, curriculum transparency with parents. I think parents and students should be involved in the development of that process so that everyone at least has a say or at least can see what's being talked about at the table.
You really have bounced around everywhere. So I'm curious if you wanted to ask like any specific things.
Part of my issue, I think, with the idea of like having it mandatory at certain ages is that some kids, and this is why I do think parents should have the right to pull their kids out, because I think some parents are like the really involved parents do know what their kids are ready for and what they aren't. Some kids are not quite ready for those conversations. I think one thing that I heard that was a little concerning to me on the liberal side and kind of kept me here was I did hear someone, I think, say something about parents of other cultures not being willing to. And I've lived in 5 countries. I've lived in 2 Muslim majority countries. I've lived in a Hindu, technically should be secular, but Hindu majority country. And I've lived in a Catholic country. And I think the Western mindset and how we approach issues, and we have to understand, like, when you're coming out of the country and you're bringing your children into a new culture as an immigrant, you want to keep your values at home, right? And there's things that you're going to be concerned about and nervous about, partially because of like religious affiliation maybe, or just not experiencing it. And so if schools want those conversations to happen, the focus needs to not be going directly to the children, but it needs to be going to the parents. It needs to be prioritizing, assimilating the parents in the culture so they are aware how to have the conversations with their kids at home. Because what ultimately happens is if the child is learning something at school and they feel like they can't go home to their parents, and the parents find out about it in a way that's not, you know, congruent or whatever, this creates a distrust from those parents with the school system. And, you know, I mean, that just brings chaos to America. That's a very serious issue.
Do you think this?
Yes, that is a huge issue. So we're running out of time. I wanted to keep this one under an hour. There are 3 more prompts left. I'm going to do a part 2 on those prompts and see what we can do. The other one, the next one is super important to me. That's why I want to kind of start on it fresh. Minors are capable of making life-altering decisions. I have a lot to say about that. So please tune in on the next clip. I'll save it to YouTube, probably upload it after this one. And I just want to say thanks to all my followers. And if you guys can, share, like, and subscribe to this channel. I'm not monetizing, but it does help get the word out. That's my big goal, is just to get the word out. We will be talking about sports a lot on this channel. So that's my main topic. Everybody knows me, and I'm in sports and saving women's sports. That's what's important to me. And then we're going to work on spaces like prisons, rape shelters, the bathroom issue. So much to talk about, you guys. And to get my word out to even the people who don't agree with me, that's more important to me than subscribers. Like, I want to reach people and let them know that things don't have to be the way they are right now. So I appreciate you guys for tuning in. Thanks. And we'll see you later on the next one.